All right, let's dive into our summary and commentary of Section T8 using our key takeaway slides, starting with SSB, which is amplitude modulation with narrower bandwidth at 3 kilohertz. It's best for weak signals in HF. Yes, that works really well as far as being able to talk around the world on HF, extends the range of VHF when you use sideband with even the same power. If any of you were ever CB folks like I was, when you were on AM, you were a little more restricted in range. Whenever if you got a sideband capable radio and went over there, then the signals kind of drew in from a lot further away. I think they actually allowed you a little bit more power. It was like 12 watts instead of 5 over on sideband. But even with equal amount of power compared to AM or FM, you do get a lot more range, and it on the HF bands equates to being able to talk around the world, or depending on the band, you can have long QSOs with folks that are hundreds of miles away from you. And then FM or PM, which we mostly use FM, is angle modulation. It's 10 to 15 kilohertz bandwidth and standard for VHF, UHF repeaters. So it does take up a lot more space. If you get into HF or if you have a radio like one of these shack-in-the-box radios where you have a waterfall even on 2 meters and 70 centimeters, you can tell a big difference when you switch these modes around and look, and you can see how wide that signal is on that waterfall compared to CW and SSB. And of course, CW has the narrowest bandwidth at 150 hertz. It's really neat if you, obviously, if you're watching this and you're looking to get your license, you probably haven't done a whole lot of anything with CW, but hopefully that'll be something that's of interest to you. And especially if you get on the bands during contests, check out CW and just how many signals you have packed in such a small area, and you think, how am I going to be able to hear all those? And you can take the filtering on your radio and adjust it down. And I take mine all the way down to where it's only listening 50 hertz wide, and I can pin down that one signal that I'm listening to. And I do use software to help, and it decodes it really well. If you do get into CW, especially in contesting, it's good to actually learn it. It's not one of those things that you can do and you'll get overwhelmed if you just try to download some software and decode CW strictly. If you don't actually know it to some degree, it'll throw letters in there and stuff as it picks up static and other little signals, and it's just, you get used to your own call sign, you get used to the normal stuff, the thank you and the signal reports and all that stuff. And once you learn that, then the software is just sort of a kind of a help or a little safety net. Upper sideband is used on 10 meters and above, and then lower sideband is used on 40 meters and below. So if you are coming from the Citizens band or 11 meters, they have a tendency to run that backwards for whatever reason. They usually, most of the ones, at least in my area, that I've run across, and I love to tune down there and listen. I really don't engage much because my radio won't transmit down there, but I do tune around and see what's out there and listen. And you'll hear a lot of folks, especially when the DX is up and running good, you'll hear a lot of folks that are operating lower sideband on Citizens band, but using this, they should actually be on upper sideband. So anything 40 meters and below is lower sideband, and that's speaking of the frequency as saying below. So it's like 40, 80, there's a 60 meter band and 160 meters. So the actual band name goes up, but we're speaking of the frequency itself going down, going toward 1 megahertz. FM's capture effect is great for local comms, but bad for weak signals. Yeah, that's one of the reasons that like FT8 and stuff, they have their own in most radios now, what they call digital U or digi-U, but it's, if you take an older radio and you interface it with your computer, then you would run just upper sideband on those. FM is just a little too wide, doesn't work good for weak signals. And then, of course, the bandwidth hierarchy goes as far as from the least amount that it takes up going up is CW, SSB, FM, SSTV or slow scan TV, and fast scan TV at 6 megahertz. And one thing to bear in mind, you'll hear the term weak signal, weak signal, weak signal a lot in these slides, and it's mentioned in a few of these questions. One common misnomer is weak signal does not mean low power. You can in the FT8 portions of the band or whatever, you will hear people on a regular basis misrepresent or say, you're limited to this amount of power, or you shouldn't run more than this much power on FT8. One guy I knew said he only ever ran 30 watts or whatever, and you can do a lot with that. I mean, it's an excellent QRP mode and those weak signal modes, but CW, FT8, any of that, you can run amplified power. It doesn't take you from being a weak signal to a strong signal type situation. It amplifies the signal that exists. So basically what it does is it's just like working a pile up on a voice mode. If you bump a little power in there, then you will rise in the pecking order a lot of times over the persons that are not running it or whatever. I don't recommend running full legal limit on one of those continuous duty cycle modes like that. It's absolutely unnecessary and splatters you all over the spectrum. But on FT8, you can run 600 to 800 watts a lot of times, and that kind of gets you at the top of the pileup, because the software a lot of times is going to take the strongest signal first. And if you're working a de-expedition or some kind of pileup activity, then that's how you're going to kind of break through to them. You may be even with a few people, but you're even with a lot less people, and you get ahead of a lot of other folks. But don't be discouraged by that either, because a lot of people run what they call barefoot, just the minimum 100 watts, and you just kind of keep calling and you'll get in there eventually. And then from T8B, satellite beacons transmit health and status information, so that's how the satellite reports its conditions to the ground crews, and that is receivable by anybody. So that may be something that you want to try listening to that kind of stuff first, see what kind of signals you can get on satellites, maybe test out your software as far as the Doppler tracking and all that kind of stuff, because even if by chance there's nobody active on the satellite, which is rare, nobody actually using it, at least you can get a signal back from that thing to be able to tell what's going on. Excessive uplink power blocks other users, so you match your signal to the beacon level. So yeah, you're using these transponders, so it sort of acts based on what kind of input it gets, so you can drown out other people, or you can cause some issues that just doesn't allow anybody to use the satellite. The Keplerian elements, TLEs, are the input for satellite tracking programs, so that's something that your software needs to know. Doppler shift as well, frequency change from relative motion between satellite and ground. I think I mentioned it in one of the earlier sections talking a little bit about satellites, that I use the Ham Radio Deluxe software, and any kind of true dual band, dual mode radio, like I had the Yaesu FT847, which is a satellite rig, and so is a Kenwood TS2000. You can interface those rigs with that software, and it will take that satellite, and it knows its positioning, and it will adjust your frequency accordingly to where you can maintain a conversation. One of the really neat things about those true satellite rigs like that, and the Flex is capable of that if you use a transverter to get 2 meter, 70 centimeter frequencies, is you can hear while you're transmitting. Like normally you key your transmitter and it kicks out your receiver and you don't hear. But on satellite communications, it's really important that you be able to still hear through your receiver while you're transmitting, because you will hear if you are making it through, if you are the one that got the transponder, or you got the signal out. And that way, if you get halfway through that transmission and you're not hearing yourself, you might as well unkey and wait, because you didn't make it in. And then, of course, the UV mode is uplink on UHF and downlink on VHF. This is fairly common that they do. Not only do you split the frequencies, but you also operate with a couple different bands. I remember years ago there was a satellite that would pass over that actually had downlink on 2 meters, and you had to uplink it. You had to transmit on 10 meters. And I haven't done satellite work in a while, so I don't know if they still have some like that, but that is a good possibility that you could run into ones where that you need to access it on HF instead of VHF or UHF. And then LEO is the low Earth orbit, and anyone may receive the telemetry like I mentioned before. So finding our next takeaway slide, here we go. So from THC, radio direction finding, or RDF, locates interference sources using directional antennas. So you can take that Yagi antenna or those satellite arrow antennas, something like that, and actually hold it in your hand with a receiver and pivot and point and try to figure out where something's coming from. If you have one at your base station, then you should be able to determine, hey, this interference that's happening to this repeater, like for instance, you'll switch over and monitor the input. And if there's any kind of signal that interferes, you should be able to rotate your beam and say, hey, okay, it is coming due east of me or due west or whatever, this direction. Well, then you can head that way and start to pin it down as you get closer. A friend of mine years ago made this little gadget where he took 4 mobile antennas, one oriented north, one south, one east, one west, and he had this little box that he made up that had the LEDs in it, and then you just connect it to a handy-talkie, and whatever side of this thing you were standing on, if you transmitted a signal that it received, the LED would light up that direction. So he could actually mount the antennas. They were magnetic on the top of his car, have the box and the handy-talkie in his car receiving the signals, and be able to see. So if he were doing like a fox hunt or something, he could get out in his car and ride around and kind of get a direction of where these signals are coming from. So that's handy to be able to find any kind of interference that you're having. And sometimes it's not deliberate or anything like it. It's just something transmitting a signal. But sometimes you also deal with people intentionally jamming. Contesting is you want to contact as many stations as possible and send the minimum required info. So if you get on the HF bands and people are contesting, some contests don't want you working the people, like it doesn't help, or it interferes if you are not going to participate in the contest by submitting a log. I don't know a whole lot of them that do that, but I have seen on Facebook and other places where people said, hey, thus and so contest is going on this week. If you hear those stations in there and you're not participating, don't contact them or anything. Most of the contests, it doesn't matter. If you hear somebody out there calling CQ contest and you want to answer and give them a contact, if they're saying contest, give them the minimum of what they need. And some of these contests don't just exchange signal reports. There are various exchanges that you may have. Sometimes they exchange their grid. Sometimes they exchange other type information. Sometimes they exchange the number of contacts. So if you hear just like an odd number at the end, if your contact number 137 for them, then they're going to give you a 137. Field day, they use different designators like 1 Alpha, 1 Bravo, 2 Bravo, whatever, Delta, and without getting totally into that, but it just designates what state or area of the state that they're in and how many stations they're running and what type of power they're running. So when you hear that on field day, if you're going to participate in the contest, look up the rules and be familiar with the exchange. If you have to, if you're brand new to it, listen to another station working for a little while and kind of get a feel of what's happening before you jump in there. And you can always look up the rules online, and they've done really good about publishing the exchanges in more detail. And you also have the option, and a lot of people don't think about it, but get on YouTube and look up that particular contest and see if anybody recorded themselves working that contest. And that's a good way to listen ahead of time. Your logging programs for contests, even if you're not real serious about the contest, sometimes you can help others by being there. You can also help others by participating in a contest group or a club, because they submit what they call an aggregate score, which is a combination of all the operators involved. And sometimes these contests require a minimum number of logs, and I've seen where it would be a contest where you got to send at least 4 logs in order to be able to submit a club score. and you have three guys that just really hammered it good and made a bunch of contacts and could have really used just one person getting on there making 2 or 3 contacts just to be able to meet the minimum log requirements. So if you get into a club or anything like that, just see what you can do to help with that. It's a really good experience. It's some good operator experience. And when the bands seem like they're just dead and dormant, a contest will wake everything up. I have never, in my years of 30-some years of being a ham, attended a field day where there wasn't a bunch of contacts to be made, even though the day before field day, the bands were just dead. It's just amazing how that works. Grid locators are letter number geographic designators, Maidenhead grid system. Like I'm at Echo Mike 87, or I'm sorry, 86, Echo Mike 86. It further truncates out and pins you down even further. I think mine is like Echo Mike 86 VO. But if you work FT8, that is actually a part of the exchange. So if you're responding to another station, you will send your call sign, and it's all, you type it all in at the beginning. But like I'll send, when I'm trying to answer a station, I click on that station to answer them. It'll send their call sign, and it'll say N4NT Echo Mike 86. So that's an important part of that. But it's all, they can also be used in contests. You can work for awards based on those grids through ARRL and some nets, and it's a infinite amount of, or would seem like to be infinite amount of things that you could do with those. IRLP connects repeaters via internet voice over internet protocol, and their access with DTMF tones. I've used that some, but not that extensively. I have used Yaesu's Wires X, which the new version, the newer Wires X, which came online about 15 years ago, they had a Wires program, not just Wires X, but it was just Wires before that, and you had to punch in DTMFs and all that kind of stuff. Wasn't quite as sophisticated, but Wires X, you don't really, the rooms have numbers, and I think that equates to like a DTMF tone or whatever, but you don't have to punch in DTMF. You just have that radio connected with a computer, and you can do that through a repeater and remotely control it in a handshake mode and change rooms and things like that. But that is all voice over internet type stuff. So the really neat thing about that is here in Bristol, I can have a repeater connected to a Wires X room, which may be controlled by a computer at someone's base station. I can be out mobile, and somebody in Europe can get on the radio or repeater in their area, and we could both be out mobile and talking to each other using our respective repeaters that end up meeting up on the internet. So I've always been fascinated with that. If you've got a dormant repeater, if you've got a club repeater that just doesn't get much action because of its location or whatever, if you want to ramp up the action, get DMR or Wires X or one of these VoIP modes on that sucker and somehow get it connected up, and you can bring the world to your little repeater that only sees about 5 or 10 people a week on it. EchoLink lets you transmit through a repeater without a radio. You can use your computer or your phone. You do have to be a licensed amateur to use it because it gives you the capability, and I've done this quite extensively. I get on the EchoLink phone app, and I'll dial up. A friend of mine has a repeater in California that's EchoLink capable. So what I'm doing is with my smartphone, I'm manipulating an actual RF signal somewhere. So I do have to be a licensed ham to be able to communicate that with that. And I'm talking to people on mobile radios and HTs and everything else. So it's just it's another form of remote operation is what it can amount to. And then a gateway connects amateur radio stations to the internet. I just talked about an example of that, like with Wires X. You download the Yaesu software and you use a computer, and that computer interfaces to a radio, and then that radio puts the signal out there. The way I kind of refer to that is I had a radio in my shack that I had connected to a laptop that transmitted and received Wires X, C4FM Wires X signal. And what I would do, I would set it to my local repeater that I was close enough to, and it basically just acts like another radio on the system, but that radio can bring in hundreds or thousands of other people communicating on there as well. Let's see, which way did I go here? Okay, so the takeaways here: digital modes include packet radio, FT8, the IEEE 802.11, PSK31, DMR, and more. So all these modes are referred to as digital modes. One of the things that you'll run into is there is some slight difference. They are all digital, but like FT8, for instance, works on single sideband mode, primarily HF, but it works VHF and UHF as well, and it requires a computer interface in order for you to have that computer send and receive signals through your radio. Whereas like DMR, you can do that, but it's also another mode, just like AM, FM, or something like that. You can take two radios, two handy talkies, two mobiles, or whatever, or a repeater, and be in DMR mode and speak to each other. And digital modes, regardless, always increase the footprint because if you are familiar with like the little satellite dishes like DirecTV and all that kind of stuff, you didn't have to have a full signal to get a clear picture. You could, I forget what the minimum signal level was. It was like 30 or 40% or something like that. But as long as it was receiving that, it looked just as good as one that had 100% signal. So digital kind of works the same way. If it's getting enough, then one's going to sound just as good as the other, regardless. If you've got somebody on the fringe or somebody that's hitting direct line of sight, those type digital modes, FT8 and some of the and PSK31 in particular that are used a lot on HF, they do let you interpret weak signal, but they will drop out at a certain point. And of course, the other modes do as well. If you get below a certain signal, it just won't receive it. But all of them have that in common, that they can receive and interpret very weak signals. The big difference is PSK and FT8 are sending data type stuff, and DMR, it's actually decoding your voice. DMR uses TDMA to fit two voice channels in one 12.5 kilohertz slot, and talk groups separate users. So yeah, that gives you a little more of a shared bandwidth and using timing. I'm not real astute on that exactly. I can use DMR and I know the code plugs and everything, how to do all that. But same thing with public service radio, where they're using trunking type systems. You can have, with 10 to 15 frequencies, you can have a few hundred channels, just the way the system times, and you're not hearing things that you're not trying to receive. FT8, the WSJTX suite, works in extremely low signal to noise ratio, signal to noise conditions. I think the test question said something to the effect, or maybe one of the summaries, that it could hear negative 20 dB. I think the weakest signal that I ever got was a negative 26, and that one, it took some work. Once you start getting about negative 22 to 24, somewhere in there, then that signal is probably not real stable and reliable. If you hear it that low once or twice, you may not hear it. You may transmit and get a report back, but you may not hear enough to complete the contact. It may not continue long enough, and then it comes back a little while later. It's just really on the fringe and up and down. And then PSK is phase shift keying. CW is carrier keyed on and off Morse code. So there's some different things you can do on CW with like the break-in settings and all that, but you can actually, as you're transmitting CW in between your characters, you can monitor as well. It doesn't just, you can set it to where it will just send everything out and then unkey the transmitter, or you can have it key and unkey as you're doing it. And then broadband hamnet is a high-speed mesh network using modified Wi-Fi equipment. That is very new to me. I haven't really experimented with that. I've heard a lot of people talking about it, but what you see there right now on the screen is about what I know about it. But it does seem amazing, and that's the beauty of this hobby is, 30-some years in the hobby, and I've not done everything. I've not done everything that was available to me 30 years ago, much less not done everything with everything that's coming along and newly developed. It's one of those things that I will try. I've tried a lot of things in this hobby and that I've really enjoyed and took off with, like FT8 in particular. And there's some things that I've tried and I'm just like, it's not for me. And that's the beauty of this hobby. There's something for everybody, and there's you virtually never run out of things to do that are different. So I don't get in a big hurry to latch on to something unless it's just like with FT8, it was just something that really helped me get my DXCCs and get something I'm interested in. But I've got time to deal with some of these other things, and I'll probably give it a try. And if I hear about it getting really active, then I'll give it a whirl myself. So the next section will be T9, and after that it's T0. After that it's done. So we've got 2 more sections to go after this.